everybody, welcome to another video from eGIS Associates. I'm here at the NC State Institute for Transportation Research and Education, where we conduct regular training classes at least once a month or so. And while I was up here, I thought it'd be a great opportunity for myself and you, our viewers, to sit down and talk with Tim Johnson, who's the director of the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis here for the state of North Carolina. It's actually a state institution, state government department. And really get a feel from him about, well, what does that center do? Because it seems to be fairly unique. I know in Georgia we don't have anything like that. We do have a GIO, but that's very much in its infancy. And so talk about what it does, a little bit of the history, and then really get into why North Carolina is a leader in the Southeast and the country in the use of GIS technologies. Because I said, in Georgia, we just got a GIO, and she's still trying to get a feel for how politics work and what they can do with it, and trying to sell the technology to the elected officials, the legislature, the governor, and so on. And here's our neighbor up to the north that has the NC1 map, for example. We can talk about that some. That's a phenomenal resource I'm very jealous of, and whatnot. So with that, Tim, if you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more and kind of, like I said, go into a little bit about the center and what it does.
All right, thanks, Triff. It's great to share some time with you and describe a little bit about what North Carolina is doing and has done. It really goes back to the 1970s, believe it or not. The Center for Geographic Information and Analysis was created as one of the first GIS statewide entities in state government in the country. I think Minnesota and North Carolina were probably on the leading edge at that time, or the bleeding edge, as it may appear. So,
do we ever get off that bleeding edge? I mean, the way this technology is changing, it's so hard to
stay on it.
Yep,
you're right. So there were two sister efforts at the time. One was our agency. We were created through the legislature to support land use policy in the 70s. So a statewide entity was viewed as being a way to do that. Building a GIS database at a statewide level, which was pretty monumental back in the 1970s and early 1980s. But the sister agency that was created was the Land Records Management Program to support creation and modernization of land records at the county level. So over time, those efforts have really been core to what we're doing today. So today, our agency, the mission is to coordinate the use of GIS among state agencies and cooperating with local governments and others to accomplish that, and to provide GIS services through the agency. Now, on a cost recovery basis, really since that early beginning period, but moving away from cost recovery now as there's more recognition at the highest levels that this needs to be a supported kind of entity in state government.
Well, that's a good point. I think in Georgia a lot we have this idea that the way to get money back from what we spend on GIS is to do things like sell data, sell the services under contract to other people. And matter of fact, in Georgia we have our open records laws actually exclude specifically GIS data from the normal requirements, and say that you can recover part of the cost of creating, maintaining that data, which includes the cost of software, the labor, the collection, and all of that stuff. And what I think we're starting to see, hopefully, and what sounds like you're seeing, is that you get a lot more ROI by using that and making it available to others than you get by trying to sell it. Right. So how have y'all made that switch? What kind of brought the light bulb on?
Well, at the state level, we've never really seriously been in the business of selling data because of the public records law in North Carolina and the fact that that data really needs to be available. So in the 1980s and 90s, the only thing we really could charge for is producing the data. We couldn't recoup any of the costs of developing it. Now, back in that same period, the counties had an exception where they could charge, but not everybody did that, and over time, that's really kind of gone away as something that they pursue. they'd rather make it available, especially as the internet grew, and those capabilities, those technical capabilities allow the citizens and others to access the data through the internet and download the data. So it's evolved partly because of technology and partly because of the public records law and what that meant in North Carolina.
So I mentioned the NC One Map portal that the state operates, and on that you can download a bunch of different data. I mean, you can get aerial photography, parcel data, road data, land use data, and the list goes on. What was the driver to institute that? Because that's not a cheap initiative.
Right.
And it's certainly not, well, even once it's up, you've got to maintain it and keep it going. So how did you, or how did your groups kind of push that, sell it, and then keep it going? Because like I said, it's a phenomenal resource.
Right. Well, it probably starts with the Geographic Information Coordinating Council, which is the state's GIS policy body that was created initially through executive order in the early 1990s through Governor Martin at the time, and then under new executive orders in the subsequent governors. But in 2001, the council was put into the statutes. And so one of the first initiatives that the council took on was, how do we make this rich data available to a broader community? So that data resides to a large extent at the counties and cities, and to also an extent in state government. So how do we bring all this together, make it easily available, make it free, make it available 24 hours a day, and make it available to managers, decision makers, and each other, frankly, as we pursue our business within either North Carolina state government or in the county governments or city governments. And also make it available to the private sector, you know, all free, all readily available. So NC One Map came about as a result of the council deciding this resource needs to get used because the citizens have paid for the production of this data and are paying for the maintenance of this data. So why don't we make it more readily useful? So it was a little bit groundbreaking at the time. This goes back to 2002 or so. And we've just continued to find ways to enrich it, keeping the data up to date, which is a challenge and requires money. So right there's an investment that's an ongoing investment that has to be made.
So how much of that is coming through cooperation and coordination with local entities, the county and city governments, and those kind of things?
That comes through the council as well. As I mentioned earlier, the Land Records Management Program created standards for local data, orthoimagery, parcels, and so forth. Those standards eventually flow through the council and become adopted statewide. The imagery standard in particular has been a core standard for many, many years. We have an ongoing program these days that is funded by the North Carolina 911 Board to update imagery every 4 years. Wherever you are in the state, you can be assured that that data is readily available. Parcels built on that, and a few years ago we created the first 100 county parcel data set for North Carolina, and has many, many, many uses. And it also, I'll say, just plugging it a little bit, it won an award about 3 years ago through ERISA International. And we were very proud of that because it took all of us years to get to the point where we were ready to bring that together. So it took great partners at the county level, as well as some cooperators at the state level who all saw the vision of what it could be. And it's been very useful in a number of situations, such as transportation planning, hurricane response, any number of things that you could name that property boundaries are useful for.
Well, I can imagine we've been trying to do a statewide parcel map in Georgia for as long as I've been down there, so over 20 years, and it's still not there yet. So the fact that y'all have accomplished that and been able to continue that, I think is a pretty amazing feat, and you well deserve that award through ERISA. So you mentioned the response to hurricanes, and that's been a big issue here last year on the coast of North Carolina and then even inland. And of course we had a couple of snowstorms stuff this winter. Luckily they never came south to Georgia. I'm very happy about that. And then we've had not just hurricane, but ongoing rain events. I mean, it seems like since October, it has not stopped raining for more than a few days. What role has the center played in that? The One Maps played in that? GIS as a whole played in that? And is there, or have y'all been leveraging that as a way to help sell and promote the technologies? Because that's all, aside from the use, one of the hardest parts a lot of folks in GIS have is, how do I sell this stuff? How do I go to my boss and explain why I need to spend $100,000, $500,000, or even $5,000 for that matter on that? So,
well, unfortunately, tragedy creates opportunity in some cases, and that's probably the case for some of the data that's pertinent to hurricane response and so forth. And back in 1999, Hurricane Floyd in the eastern part of the state, residents there experienced tremendous flooding, and the governor wanted to see the flood maps, and the flood maps were dated and not very useful to response. And as a result of that, the floodplain mapping program was born. It resides in the Department of Public Safety, Division of Emergency Management. First creation of LIDAR data statewide was done by that group, and it's being maintained today. So that's one of the fundamentals of hurricane response, knowing where the water is going to go. I guess second to that is all of the county data that's available is brought to bear when a response effort takes place. So the counties in the southeastern part of the state that have experienced hurricanes in the last couple of years definitely used GIS to prepare once they knew something was coming and to respond once it did come. And we know since hurricanes don't care which county they cross, what happened in that situation is one county needed to support efforts in its surrounding counties in some cases. And NC One Map, we believe, played a part in making that data more readily available, because it's all of the data, and it's up and running 24/7. And we know that some of the local governments were able to reach across their boundaries and help those in other parts of their area, because they don't hold all of that data themselves for the adjacent counties. So they go to NC One Map, and they go to the floodplain mapping website to get to the LIDAR data and so forth. So we know that the data has been useful. Now, it doesn't mean everything's perfect, and there's not room for improvement. I think we continued to, if we continue to see these events, we're obviously going to have to get even better at being ready, and being ready among the GIS community in North Carolina. So the council's kind of taken up that as one of its actions, as to how can we support each other better during these events, prior to and during these events.
Okay. Did those events, or whether it was the recent ones or previous ones, help induce reluctant counties or cities or other state agencies to realize that participating in, say, the One Map program was actually beneficial and overcome the reticence they might have had of giving out their data? Because there's always this "it's mine" mentality that you encounter, and the fear that if I put it into something like a data portal that NC One Map is, that suddenly they lose control of that data. So did those events help reduce that reticence, improve the value, and how many people are kind of treating NC One Map as almost like their own cloud backup, as it were?
Well, we're seeing some of that, certainly, and I think the reticence to making their data available we're probably past that. I mean, that was probably the case a number of years ago, but I think we're past that. The fact that we can bring parcels together, for example, statewide is testament to that, but I think there are other instances of that too. So I think we're past that, honestly, and that's a good thing to be able to.
That's a great thing. We're not that way in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't mean we have up-to-the-minute updates for all those data sets, because that would be really hard to accomplish. But I think we have a pretty good picture of what the state looks like.
Well, and kind of looking at that idea of real-time updates and things, what do you see as the future of GIS in North Carolina, from the state level down to the local level, you know, technology as well as intergovernmental workings, you know, working with other professions and things of that nature?
Well, there's more that we can do. You know, it's such a growing and thriving field. There, believe it or not, there's still people that aren't using it that could use it. So I think one of the efforts going forward is going to be, as a result of an effort called Next Gen 911. I think we'll be able to bring the data to bear in a bigger way to more entities, you know, state or local. The address part of Next Gen 911, keeping those addresses up to date, bringing that together statewide is going to be very important for the success of Next Gen 911. So we're gearing up to support that effort as we speak. So there are many uses of that address data once it's created and available statewide. State Board of Elections is an example. Department of Health and Human Services, another big example. Potentially entities such as the State Auditor's Office could use it, because most state data has some geographic component, and it's an address in many cases. So we've got to get the addresses right, and doing that through Next Gen 911, you've got to have it right. And we know that there's a potential update cycle on that of 72 hours, which is kind of an unheard of in the GIS community, actually. Keeping the data up to date at that kind of a level. So it's going to take it's going to take a few years to get to that point, probably, but we'll get there.
Well, it is kind of amazing to me that addresses being such a fundamental data set, whether it's points, center lines, parcel, that how bad that data is. That's one of the worst things I have to deal with my clients, is go in and trying to do any sort of geocoding or anything, and they hand me your address, and it's, oh my God, how many different ways is it spelled? You know, it's just, so yeah, it's nice to see, from my perspective anyway, that this Next Gen 911 will hopefully help clear that up, because it's a mess. And we talked a little bit when we were at the conference in Winston-Salem a few weeks ago with Dale about some of this Next Gen 911 stuff. So if you want to see that video, we talked to Dale Lobarger with Bradshaw Consulting about emergency response and Next Gen 911 stuff. I'll include a link to that in the description below. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that your center's facing, the state of North Carolina's facing, or the GIS profession as a whole, because you've been out there as long or longer than I have?
Well, I think the challenges are continuing to tell the story of what the technology can accomplish, because we still have, like I said earlier, we still have folks who are not using it yet that could use it. Sometimes it's a money situation, but it's not always a money. It's just awareness in some cases. So I think that's a challenge for us. I think achieving the Next Gen 911 goals is a challenge. People ask me about that fairly frequently, and that's just the next mountain to climb. And it's going to be important that we get there, because people's lives are at stake. So we'll get there, but it's going to take 2 or 3 years of development to get it into a statewide situation. I think as far as the profession, I think we continue to try to establish our identity, and through the council we've been working with North Carolina Board of Engineers and Surveyors at trying to determine, Board of Examiners for Engineers and Surveyors, to try to determine what are the boundaries, so to speak, between those two professions. And we had an hour and a half at the conference where we had a very lively panel and a discussion. I think you were there for all of it. So that's been a dialogue for the past couple of years, and we're getting ready to kind of wrap up this engagement with NCBs and produce some information that the community can react to. But I think it's getting a little clearer to me what the boundaries are as we went through those discussions.
I was impressed. Somebody that started out in surveying. I mean, my dad was a surveyor, so yeah, he had me out surveying when I could carry a machete in the field, and I've drug a chain and done all that kind of stuff. So that the idea of where the boundary between surveying and GIS is a topic that is also very important to me. And I guess I always felt I knew where that boundary was. And I'm very impressed when I was sitting in on that presentation to see the progress that y'all have made up here on taking a very cooperative approach between GIS and surveyors on trying to figure out where that is, because it can get fuzzy.
Absolutely.
So I was impressed, and I think, will that be, I know they recorded a bunch of sessions at the conference. Will that be available?
Absolutely.
Sometime soon?
All of it. All the sessions at the conference will be available through our YouTube channel probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I would say.
Okay.
Including that session. So I'm anxious to hear, I was moderating that session, so I'm anxious to hear everything that was said, because it's important that we get it right.
Absolutely. So once that gets published, I'll try to add a link to it too, because I think it was a very good discussion. And this is a topic that's not just North Carolina centric. It's a national topic. URISA's been heavily involved, and as a past president of that organization, I've been there helping. We were involved in Virginia and Maryland, where they were trying to change some laws, and then in Georgia, in Washington, Oregon as well. So, this is a big topic, and we want to stay on top of that. So one other question, just to clarify, because I want to make sure I understand, you work for the Center of Geographic Information Analysis. You mentioned the council. Can you kind of explain how GIS is organized in the state?
Okay. So I didn't cover that as well as I could have. So our agency is in the Department of Information Technology. We report to the Secretary of that department. There's a lot of history behind where we've been over the years, but about a decade ago it was determined that that was the best place for a statewide GIS coordination function. So we were moved into that department. There are many other departments in state government that have their own GIS units or GIS capabilities, but we work together through the council. There's a state government users committee that reports to the council that's representative of all those state agencies. There's a local government committee that's representative of all the local governments in North Carolina. So that's how it comes together. The council is local, state, federal, private sector, and the UNC system also has a place on the council. It's a big council. It's about 33 members. Okay,
that is a pretty big group.
It's one of the bigger state commissions.
And does that council have? It sounds like they do, but do they have some sort of mandate, directive power that comes either legislatively or through the governor's office or something?
Well, it was born years ago out of a concern that there might be duplication of efforts between the state departments going after the same data, spending state resources twice or 3 times
or more.
So it was born out of that. So over the years, we try to bring the issues together to make sure that there's not duplication, make sure we're talking to each other. And initially, the council was limited to, mostly to state government agencies, but a decade or more ago, it was really broadened to include local governments in a big way. So I'd say 1/3 of the council members are local governments. And they're appointed either by virtue of the statute or by the governor or by the North Carolina House or North Carolina Senate.
Okay.
So it has input from a number of bodies. The council issues an annual report every year to the governor and the General Assembly. But we're an advisory body. We're not a regulatory body.
Okay.
We advise the governor and the General Assembly on needed directions. So if something comes out of the council related to how we can do better with emergency response, that'll be fed to those House and Senate leaders and the governor as a result of the deliberations of the council, as an example.
Typically, how are the recommendations received by the governor and the legislative bodies?
Well, it's like any other group that reports. We report what we think needs to happen. We just encourage action. We can't,
Yeah.
force action, or and if it's into the priorities of the state, just like any other technology or programmatic kind of direction. So.
Well, I guess what I was trying to get at is, do they actually listen? I know that there's limits and other factors but in Georgia we have a Geographic Information Council as well, but it was funded and mandated back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then it lost its charter, and there was no champion to continue to push it. So it still exists as a voluntary group that comes together, mostly from state agencies, but it doesn't really have a venue to make recommendations through. Now we have the GIO that's changing a little bit, but I guess I was trying to see how effective that was, because you do seem to you actually have a direct pipeline to the powers that be, as it were.
Well, the recommendations in the annual report, for example, go to the leadership, the governor and the leadership in the legislature, and depending on what it is, it could be heard by the Information Technology Oversight Committee, which is kind of the way that it falls within the structure within the legislative committees.
Okay.
And one encouraging thing is we've really gone, as an agency that supports the council, our agency is the staff to the council. Our agency is moving from receipts-based positions to appropriate positions. So we feel like they're doing that. Legislature's accomplishing that, or helping us by accomplishing that for us, and that's a good sign that we're doing good things. We're doing important things. So, at least we like to think we're doing important things.
Well, apparently you are. Like I said, the state of North Carolina is definitely a leader in the Southeast, if not the whole country, because of efforts like NC1 Map, the obvious successful responses to the recent weather events and whatnot. And even if you just look at the number of GIS certified professionals, y'all are second only to Florida in the number of GISPs in the region. So
we were an early adopter, I think, of that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Georgia was the first, but obviously y'all continue to push that. In judging by the GISP workshop I did at the conference and the other workshops I do periodically, which ironically through the North Carolina Public Works Association, they're supporting the GISP. I don't understand why that's not ERISA, but anyway, a lot of attendance, a lot of interest in that certification, and to help, again, to continue to push GIS is a true profession, not just a tool.
Right. It's much more than a tool.
It is, and for some folks, I get it is a tool, but in order to have it as the tool, you got the professionals that are back there generating the tool, the data the tool uses in a way that makes it worthwhile. So very, very excited at that. I think that's about it. Do you have anything else you wanted to bring up that would?
We've covered a good bit of the ground. I could go into the history for a long time since there's so much history both at the local and at the state level, but I think we've hit the high points.
I think we've hit, we can save that. That gives us something to talk about next time. So, well, I appreciate you taking the time to come here and do this. I'm sure our viewers will appreciate it as well. Of course, we want to make sure that if you're in North Carolina, that you get up here for their GIS conference, which happens every odd year. So we just had it this year. It was in Winston-Salem, so look for it in, let's see, 2021.
Yeah.
Wow.
Location to be determined.
Location to be determined. It's a great conference I go to a bunch of conferences, and a state conference for GIS, if you get 300 people, you're doing good. North Carolina, they would consider that a failure. They've got to have 700 to 800 attendees, which they do all the time in order to have it. So it's a great one, great presentations, great vendors. You run it, great job on that. So with that, folks, we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Look for the links I told you about in the description below. If you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to be notified when new videos come out, subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the alert button. And of course, don't forget to check out our merch store so you can get some nice eGIS shirts. You want to have those because you want to be one of the cool kids. And if you really, really like what you're